Our project, we called it Sector Dominance through Project One with Matt, Yoko, myself, and Drew. And we had one, while many groups had many questions, we only had one question. And that question was where to put your money, where to invest. And thanks to that, we had the hypothesis that he said that the technology sector has dominated the American economy in the past years and will continue to do so. So we set about proving this hypothesis and seeing what the facts really showed us. So we chose the S&P 500 as our portfolio to compare, to dissect, and to find out how the different sectors have done. Yoko, if you can go back, please. So this is the S&P sector dominance by percentage in 2008 and now. And we see here that the infotech sector has more than doubled in the past 13 years. Now we performed many other analysis on the S&P 500 to determine our results, and Drew's going to share with you some of the functions that we did. Drew?
Hi, I'm sorry. Okay, so our first challenge was figuring out how to accurately represent each sector of the market. We landed on using ETFs created by the Vanguard Group, an investment management company, to reflect each sector within the S&P 500. We also included SPY, which, as we all know, is an ETF designed to track the S&P 500 index, so we could compare the sectors to the market as a whole. Next slide. Thank you. We chose our start date to be January 2008. This way we could look at how two major economic crises, being the housing crisis and the global pandemic, have affected each sector. We then used the Alpaca API to pull historical data for each ETF. However, Alpaca has a limit of querying 4,000 business days at a time. In order to get 13 years worth of data, multiple queries had to be made. Our Python code uses a while loop that takes the start date and offsets 1,000 business days at a time until the final day is reached. Next slide, please. The result is a pandas data frame that includes open, high, low, close, and volume for each ETF. This data frame is in the correct format for our Monte Carlo simulation, but for that we'll drop the SPY data. Matt will talk more about that a little later. Next slide, please. Since we only need closing prices for our historical data analysis, we created an empty data frame for closing prices, pulled in each closing price from the previous data frame, and edited the column names for readability. Then we sorted the index to be in ascending order from past to present, dropped all nulls and duplicates, and renamed the index to be date, and wrote the data frame to an CSV for reference. Next slide, please. This is our final cleaned up data frame for data analysis. As you can see, it has 3,314 rows, which is equal to just over 13 years of trading days, and 12 columns, one for each ETF. Next slide, please. So just based on closing prices, we can see that energy, materials, and utilities were actually the highest in 2008. However, infotech, consumer discretionary, and healthcare have the highest closing prices in 2021. This illustrates a major shift in the economy and investment strategy. To learn more, we used closing prices to calculate the daily return for each ETF, which was the first step to developing a better understanding of our data. Here's Yoko to discuss our data analysis.
Okay. Our focus is to create a portfolio with long-term investment strategy. So we analyzed each sector's returns, risks, and trend, considering diversification too. So the first plot that you are seeing right now is cumulative returns, like box plot. So we found a very interesting result that the really right side of the box is a result from S&P 500. So the lower quartile result is actually showing in red line, and which is like lower than the tech sector's lower quartile here, like this. Oops, sorry, the slide moved. So even the minimum cumulative return of S&P 500 is like pretty much similar to infotech, and even like healthcare minimum returns are above S&P result. So then, which makes me wonder why would be like our risk if we put our money to the info sector only. So then we further analyzed the relationship between sectors, and we found that infotech, consumer discretionary, industrial, and material sectors has higher correlationship with S&P 500. But as we found that industrial and material sector has like smaller bucks from the previous plot, so meaning that it could be lower, smaller returns, right? So then we further looked into Sharpe ratio. So then we found that tech, healthcare, and consumer discretionary has higher value than others. And we went back to the heat map to check the relationship of those sectors, like those three. And as you can see that infotech and consumer discretionary sector has really strong relationship, like circled in yellow, but we thought that it's possible because the consumer discretionary sector is highly related to the IT related goods and services, so that which give us more confidence that IT related businesses are growing a good market to invest. So that's why we decided to run the future prediction with those three sectors: infotech, healthcare, and consumer discretionary sectors with Monte Carlo model. So then Matt's gonna talk about our future prediction.
Yeah, so next we took an unweighted portfolio. If you want to switch the slide, Yoko. Go back to that in 1 sec. So yeah, we took an unweighted portfolio of the S&P 500 for all of the sectors. So with that Vanguard ETF, but giving exposure to all the sectors, this was our frequency distribution. And as you can see, it was a pretty normal distribution. There's a bit of skewness to the right. The average result being 6.5. And if you want to flip to the next page. So we wanted to go a step further, and instead of just getting exposure to all the sectors, we wanted to create a custom portfolio that gave exposure to specific sectors. And Yoko went over a bit for why we selected those three sectors, mostly being the highest risk adjusted return with infotech, healthcare, and consumer discretionary. And they also had high correlation scores in relation to the overall direction of the SPY, the whole S&P 500 as a whole. So we took this custom portfolio and went on to do a 500 count 20-year Monte Carlo simulation. That was the same as the first simulation. I forgot to mention that, but it's a 500 count 20-year Monte Carlo simulation. And I have here the summary statistics showing the differences. The mean, for example, was almost 3 times the score, 3 times the multiple for the weighted portfolio, and the confidence intervals, a 95% confidence interval given for the lower and upper bounds were significantly different, giving higher projected potential returns. And if you want to go on to the next slide. So in conclusion, in the bottom left, we've got the 20-year results with an initial investment of $20,000 and a confidence level of 95%, returning an unweighted, with the unweighted portfolio between 60K and 130K, and the weighted portfolio between 100 and 860K, with some of our simulations throughout working with the code resulting in over $1 million because of the far right skewedness of our second portfolio simulation. And yeah, looking up above at the original graph that we use, we've seen that the tech sector and consumer discretionary and healthcare have grown from 21% to 45% overall dominance in the S&P 500. Specifically tech, we came in with the idea that tech would dominate, and it had a multiple of over 2.4, but I was surprised, and our group was surprised to see that consumer discretionary also had a multiple of over 2. And we think that with the current coronavirus environment and with stimulus packages on the way and stimulus checks hitting, asset prices may continue to rise. And if you're looking for exposure to S&P 500 and maybe sector specific data, then our graphs will help you decide that. We landed on these 3 and these were the results for us. So yeah, any questions? This next slide.
Oh, I thought we had a question slide, but any questions?
Oh, oops. Is that not there?
Okay.
What would you say was the hardest part of your project?
I think Drew could speak on it more, but for the data collection, we had a couple different problems with retrieving data for selecting what tickers we wanted to use for the sectors and also combining all the data into one data frame. We had one process. Drew, do you want to explain the 2 different processes for how you clean the data?
Well, originally we were using an API called we called it the FMP API, and it brought in the data, but in the end we saw that it was only bringing in like 1,200 rows or something, and that just wasn't enough data to reflect accurately what we were trying to look for. So that was our original problem. So we moved over to Alpaca, and then we had the 1,000 row limit problem, and we wanted to write our own code to get around that, which also created a little stumble for us, but we got around it. And then we knew that we wanted to do the forecasting for the future with the Monte Carlo. So that was the other reason that we had to use the Alpaca API, because it's very specifically formatted to work with the Monte Carlo simulation code. So those were the challenges that we faced. There was also quite a challenge in all the different sectors, because there were 11 of them. It was quite a lot of data to compare to each other. Like in the correlation heat map, you could see how many little squares there are and how many different comparisons there are to make. So there was quite a lot of data to deal with, but in the end, the numbers came through.
Curious if you guys think that in the future going forward, given that tech is kind of creeping into everything, that maybe that trend will not necessarily continue because every sector will essentially have a lot of tech in it?
True.
I do think so. Especially you can, once we learned a little bit more about consumer discretionary, it's kind of a big overlap from infotech into consumer discretionary. And so I do see a lot of blurredness between the lines, and it'll be interesting to see how that morphs over the next 13 years and how the sectors, if they even change maybe, which would be big.
So in conclusion, put your money in.
One more question,
infotech?
sorry, Scott. Sorry, one more question. Have you guys maybe considered also or thought through how the different administrations over the years have potentially influenced the market and those sectors? Was it a thought that came maybe to your head?
Well, you can definitely see how each administration impacts the economy, right? We can see over the past 4 years how the economy has gone up. So we'll see how this future administration affects the economy in the future. I don't know, do any of my other teammates have anything to say about this?
So I was going to say, in conclusion, put your money in infotech, healthcare, or consumer discretionary. You can't go wrong.
It'll be interesting. That was a great question, Christian. It'll be interesting to see, you know, with the attacks on big tech from, you know, like on their almost monopoly on everything. See if that affects the sector and with this administration, not just this administration, but maybe just overall. I mean, because it's not a partisan issue. I guess you could say both parties are on board on this kind of attack on big tech to break them up and to almost divide it. And so anyways, great presentation. I really enjoyed and it was very interesting to understand that growth in tech, and obviously everyone knows it and knows that big tech has grown just so much over
Right.
the technology sector has grown so much over since 2008, and obviously it was good to see that in those graphs. Thank you.